Have you guys ever been surprised? Maybe you thought something was going to work out one way, but in the end it turned around and was very, very different than the way you thought it was going to work out. Some of you heard me tell this story, and I sent it out in a blog entry this week, so some of you may have read that. But a few weeks ago, probably a couple months ago now, Dawson and Levi and I went over to Missouri to watch the Georgia Bulldogs play the Missouri Wildcats, or Tigers, not Wildcats, Tigers. And on the way over there, we stopped in Springfield, Illinois to see some friends. And a while back, Levi particularly was into this show called Man vs. Food. Have you guys ever seen that? And there's a place in Springfield that it was on that show, and it had to do with a bowl of chili. I'll just show you the bowl of chili here. And the deal was, if you would eat this one bowl of chili, you get your name on the wall. It's pretty spicy, has habanero peppers in it. I mean, this thing lights you up, let me just tell you. And so we go in there, and Dawson's going to order that, and Levi wants to order a bowl too. And I'm thinking, there's no way he's going to finish this. But he was pretty insistent that he wanted to try. So we ordered the 2 bowls of chili. I didn't dare get near it. And we go down, and they begin to eat. And Dawson is eating and doing a pretty good job, sweating through it. And finally, Dawson finishes his bowl. And I'm thinking, you know, I'm going to be walking out of this place in a few minutes, just telling Levi, you know, you did a good job, buddy. You at least finished some of it, and you tried it, you know, that kind of thing. But Levi's insistent. He continues to eat this bowl of chili, and he's taking a little more time, but he keeps going. And the lady comes over who owns the place, and she goes, "How old is he?" So, well, he's 7. She said, "Well, if he eats this bowl of chili, he'll be the youngest one to have ever done this." And I'm thinking, I turned to my friend I was sitting beside me and said, "Yeah, you think, you know, probably not too many 7-year-olds want to try this." And he said, "Yeah, probably not too many 7-year-old parents let their kids try it." I said, "Yeah, you're right." Christy wasn't with me. It wouldn't have happened if she would have been there. But he continues to eat this bowl of chili. He says his stomach's hurting, but he keeps going. And she's going, "You know, sometimes that comes back up." And I'm thinking, that's not going to feel good either. And get a little nervous, but he does it. And he finishes this bowl of chili. And he gets his name on the wall. He's the youngest ever, right, Levi? Set a record. I was completely blown away. I was surprised, a pleasant surprise, but we quickly made our way to Walgreens, loaded him up with Tums, and prayed that would stay down. But sometimes life is like that, isn't it? Sometimes we go a particular direction, and we think something's going to turn out one way, and it turns out an entirely different way. This morning, we're kind of narrowing down this study in the book of Genesis, and we're coming to the end of the story. We've got a couple more weeks in the story, but we're coming to this part where Jacob is getting ready to die. Now, I'm not going to rehash the whole story this morning, but you know Abraham and then Isaac and then Jacob. And Jacob's son Joseph has been down in Egypt. Remember, he's sold into slavery there. And finally, the way the story unfolds, Jacob and his family join Joseph in Egypt. It's an escape from them. They're able to be down there during this famine. And God, in essence, is saving his people by rescuing them and bringing them to Egypt. But they're there in Egypt, and Jacob's getting ready to pass away. And do you remember what generally happens when a patriarch is about to pass away? What does he do? He offers a blessing to his son, particularly his older son, right? That's how it typically works out. We've seen several of these through the book of Genesis, but I want to just remind you about blessings. And if you remember, I put this quote on the screen when we were in the story of Jacob and Esau, and we were talking about Isaac's blessing and how important that blessing was for his sons. And we read this: "Blessings or curses pronounced by the patriarch of the family were always taken seriously and considered binding." So here's the deal. These blessings aren't just a, you know, God bless you, hope you have a great life kind of blessing. They're big deal words. And not only that, but we know that Jacob is also passing on the blessing that God gave to Abraham, was passed down to Isaac, was passed down to Jacob, and now Jacob, in essence, has this blessing of the salvation promise that he's going to be passing on down. So these blessings are a big deal. We also, just to kind of or cover this again, but recount this about blessings. Blessings are typically given to the oldest son. That's just how it worked out in ancient times. I mean, the older son was the one who got the family name, who got the land, who got the blessing, and it is through his family that the blessing continues. But we know, as we've been reading this story, there's some exceptions in the story, aren't there? One exception was Jacob himself, right? But you might be going, well, that's not right because he tricked his dad, right? That wasn't how it worked out. But there are some exceptions in the story, and we're going to come to another exception this morning. But this morning, let me tell you, no tricks involved in this exception. So blessings are a big deal, and blessings are usually passed on to the oldest son. So we remember that as we kind of get into this. And again, this deal, this salvation promise, this blessing, this is important here. So open your Bibles with me to Genesis chapter 48. And again, let me warn you, this could easily turn into like a history lesson if we're not careful, okay? But stay with me as we read this. Walk through this story with me together because it's important. Now, I'm going to back up to Genesis 47, verses 29 and 30, and just give you a little bit of background here. Jacob gives instructions to Joseph. Do not bury me in Egypt, but when I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me where they are buried. So Jacob, again, they're in Egypt. God is saving them. He's providing a place of provision for them, but he doesn't want to always stay there. They want to get back to this land that God promised. And then we read verse 1 in chapter 48. Sometime later, Joseph was told, your father is ill. Now, this is the context for the story today. Now, one more note. We get pretty detailed accounts, don't we, of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, of Joseph. The stories are detailed about their life. Now, I'm just going to tell you, at this point, when Jacob passes on his blessing to the next generation, the Bible kind of zooms out at that point. And we don't get detailed accounts from this point on. So just a note there, just so you're aware of that. So, we've got Jacob passing on the blessing here, and we read in verse 1, sometime later Joseph was told, your father is ill. So, he took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, along with him. Did you remember who those guys are? Manasseh and Ephraim? They're the sons of Joseph, he was given a wife when he came into Pharaoh's court, and he had two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Those are the sons there. Verse 2, when Jacob was told, your son Joseph has come to see you, Israel, that's Jacob, rallied his strength and sat up on the bed. Now, Jacob's old, he's near death, and Joseph comes in. And he regains his strength. He gets up a little bit because he's got something to do, but also we know that Joseph's important to him. And Joseph arrives, and it doesn't seem that Joseph's coming to get a blessing. It's not like he's told, your father's going to bless you now, you better go before he dies. He's just coming to see his dad because his dad's ill, and he's told that he doesn't have much longer. But remember, Joseph is Jacob's favorite son. We read in verse 3, Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and there he blessed me and said to me, I'm going to make you fruitful and will increase your numbers. I'll make you a community of peoples, and I'll give you this land as an everlasting possession to your descendants. Now, you go, what's this all about here? Now think with me for a minute. Have you ever been in a place with someone when they're about to pass away? You don't talk about the weather, do you? You don't ask what's coming on TV tomorrow night. You have these conversations that are significant conversations. I remember when my grandfather passed away, I was a youth pastor in Springfield, and we were driving down to Florida, and we came through Georgia there, and we knew that it was toward the end, and we stopped off and spent about a week with him, and then we had to make the decision, do we go down with the teenagers to Florida, or do we stay here? And we knew it wouldn't be long. We knew it was a matter of days, and we thought we ought to just go on down to Florida with the teenagers. So I remember going in with my grandfather there, and knowing that it would be the last time I would see him. and spending time with him and talking to him. That's a hard thing to do, isn't it? But those are significant moments. And so we know that this is a significant moment. It's like that. It's Jacob is there with Joseph. They love each other. They've had most of their life they've been apart. Jacob thought he was dead and Joseph was in slavery. But now they're together again, but they know it's going to be their last moments. And Jacob has a plan. He's going to do something here. He's going to catch Joseph off guard, and I think catch us off guard as we read this story. So Jacob, again, has a plan. Let's see what he does. Verse 5. Now then, your 2 sons born to you in Egypt before I came to you here will be reckoned as mine. Jacob saying this to Joseph. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine. Any children born to you after them will be yours. In the territory they inherit, they will be reckoned under the names of their brothers. Now you go, what? What's he doing here? Jacob is clearly adopting his grandsons. He's on his deathbed, but he's adopting his grandsons. Why would he do this? And here's the deal. Jacob is totally legit in what he's doing here. In fact, if you read the Code of Hammurabi, which is an ancient law code, you see that if a man wants to pass on an inheritance to his grandson, he must first adopt them as his own sons. So Jacob's got a plan. He wants to pass on his inheritance to his grandsons. So here in the text, we see him adopting them as his own sons. He says, look, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine, now these 2 boys, Manasseh and Ephraim, are going to be mine. Now think about this. Grandsons usually don't inherit, do they? It's usually the sons. But there's going to be an exception here. Jacob has a plan, and he legally adopts his grandsons. Now how many sons does Jacob have? He has 12 sons, right? But now you're going to see these 2 sons receiving the inheritance of Joseph. Now, think about this for a minute. How many of you have kids in here? When someone pays your kid a compliment, doesn't that do more for you than if they pay you a compliment? Wouldn't you rather hear someone say, your kid did something that was good, or your kid did this or that? Isn't that right? So in essence, as Jacob is blessing Joseph's sons, he is blessing Joseph. So Joseph's not getting left out of a deal. He's actually getting a greater blessing because his sons are being blessed here. And so Jacob's going to adopt Joseph's 2 sons, and then they are going to receive a portion of the inheritance as if they were sons. So what you're seeing here is Joseph is going to get double the inheritance of his other brothers. Now, why would Jacob do this? Why would Jacob give double the inheritance to Joseph? Now we're going to delve into this a little bit next week. As Jacob blesses his other sons, you're going to see why he did this. But we also know that Jacob has a favorite wife, right? And that favorite wife is Rachel. And he's going to talk about her here in verse 7. Jacob recalls Rachel. Look at verse 7. As I was returning from Padam, to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan while we were still on the way, a little distance from Ephrath. So I buried her there, beside the road to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. You can imagine Jacob in this conversation with Joseph, this deathbed conversation, this intimate conversation. And as he's talking to him, he says, I'm telling you, I loved your mom, right? She was beautiful. She was wonderful. I can imagine tears running down his cheek as he recalls her death. You know, she must have been young, right? Because she dies giving birth to Benjamin. And Jacob recalls that if you go to Genesis chapter 35, you can read the whole story of how this worked out. But in essence, Jacob is saying goodbye to Joseph, and he's saying to Joseph, I want you to know, I loved your mom. I want you to know that. I want you to know how special she was to me. And then he gets ready to bless the 2 boys here. In verse 8 we read, and when Israel, that's Jacob, saw the sons of Joseph, he asked, who are these? So, and obviously he doesn't know them necessarily. Again, they are Egyptian. You know, their mom's Egyptian. So they probably grew up in Pharaoh's court. So they probably dressed like Egyptian boys, right? And they're standing there. And Joseph says in verse 9, "They are the sons God has given me here." Joseph said to his father, then Israel said, "Bring them to me so that I may bless them." Now, in the following verses here, you're going to see a lot of similarities between Jacob at this point in his life and his dad, Isaac. Do you remember Isaac when he's getting ready to bless Jacob and Esau? He's old, right? He can't see. And so we read here in verse 10, "Now Israel's eyes were failing because of his old age, and he could hardly see. So Joseph brought his sons close to him, and his father kissed them and embraced them." Look at Jacob's words here. He recalls the heartache and the joy of Joseph. Israel said to Joseph, verse 11, "I never expected to see your face again, and now God has allowed me to see your children too." You can't believe this blessing. I thought you were dead, but now I'm standing here, and your boys are standing here in front of me. The text is very descriptive here in the way that Joseph removes the boys from Jacob's knee and places them in front of him. We read in verse 13 then, "And Joseph took both of them, Ephraim on his right toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh on his left toward Israel's right hand, and he brought them close to him. But Israel reached out his hand and put it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger. And crossing his arms, he put his left hand on Manasseh's head, even though Manasseh was the firstborn." So, do you see what he's doing here? Joseph lines them up just right. All right, here's this one. Here's the older one. The older one is on Jacob's left, right? No, right? You have to get all this right. Was it stage right, stage left, all that stuff, right? But he's got where Jacob would put his right hand on the older. Why? Because the right hand is the hand of blessing, right? It's the hand of power. It's the hand that would have gone on the firstborn. So Joseph lines them up just right. But when the boys are there, Jacob does this number. Crosses his hands. He actually takes his right hand and puts it on the younger, and his left hand and puts it on the older. And Joseph's probably thinking, Dad's getting old now, he can't see. He must be a little bit confused here. But we keep reading. "Then he blessed Joseph and said, 'May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all my harm, may he bless these boys.'" So picture him sitting there. May they be called by my name and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they greatly increase upon the earth." So he's passing his blessing on to the boys, and Joseph sees it coming, and Joseph's like, wait a minute, Dad. You got your arms crossed. You got your hands on the wrong kid. Look there in verse 17. "When Joseph saw his father placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he was displeased. So he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Joseph said to him, 'No, my father, this is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head.'" Remember, Dad? The right hand on the oldest. That's how it's supposed to be, right? But look at verse 19. "But his father refused and said, 'I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations.' He blessed them that day and said, 'In your name will Israel pronounce the blessing. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh.' So he put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh." Jacob's doing it on purpose, isn't he? He's not just old and senile. Jacob is flipping it around. Why would he do this? Some of you might be going, well, Jacob was the younger, right? And he kind of knew that's how God was going to do it. But I think this story teaches us that God is the kind of God who likes to flip things around, isn't it? He's the kind of God who doesn't do it just like we expect him to do it, right? We line our stuff up. We line everything up, and we say, "All right, God, put your right hand here, your left hand here." And God says, "I'm not doing it that way. I'm going to do it this way instead." Doesn't he? It's kind of like Jesus, isn't it? Do you remember what Jesus said? The first will be last, and the last will be first. Jesus flipped it around. He took the cultural expectations of the day, and Jesus said, no, we're not going to be that way. We're going to do it in a different sort of way. Jesus lived in a world where the proud got it all, and Jesus said, no, the humble, the meek will inherit the earth. You see, that's the kind of God we serve. We keep reading here, verse 21. Then Israel said to Joseph, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and take you back to the land of your fathers. And to you, as one who is over your brothers, I give you the ridge of land I took from the Amorites with my sword and my bow. So we see Joseph here being elevated too. Jacob gives him a mountain. And Jacob thinks that, once he passes on, it's not going to be too long, Joseph's going to pack it up and head back to Canaan. But it's not going to work out that way, is it? In fact, it's going to be many years that God's people will live in Egypt, that they'll be enslaved. And you remember the story. You know how it all works out. But this mountain that Jacob gives Joseph at this point is later the place where the people of God place Joseph's body. So it does work out in the end. What a story. Wouldn't you agree? And we have to be careful again. I have the tendency as we get this and you're reading through it, you're going, man, this is kind of monotonous and it might be a little boring. And, why is Wade preaching on Genesis 48 out of all the passages of Scripture? Couldn't he pick a better story than this one? Right? But as we go through the story, we learn things, don't we? That we wouldn't normally see. And while we're tempted to kind of put Genesis down and say, well, it's basically the end already, if we just keep reading all the way to the end, we learn some things that we normally would not learn. And so on the surface, historically speaking, what's this story about? Well, the story is about Jacob passing his blessing on to his two grandsons, right? And this is going to play out. It's going to have some significance as you study the Old Testament and the tribes of Israel and how that's going to work out. We're going to get into that a little bit more next week because Jacob's going to unpack even more next week about the sons and why each one is getting what the particular blessing that he gets and how that's going to play out in history. We're going to look at that next week. But for today, I think the application is that we serve a God. We serve a God who surprises us. Don't you think? We serve a God of surprises. A God who likes to have twists and turns, right? And we read a story. And we've been reading the story of Genesis now since the week after Easter, right? And we're reading it and we think, oh, it's going to go this way. And if you've been to Sunday school, you already know the twists and turns, right? But if you read it for the first time, you think, well, it's going to go this way. This is going to happen. And it doesn't happen. Oh, well, okay, well then it starts moving this way. Oh, okay, well I know and it's going to work out this way. And all of a sudden, it doesn't happen that way, does it? And it goes this way. And the story is a story of twists and turns. It's a story of surprises. It's a story of God doing the unexpected. And that's the kind of God we serve, isn't it? And that applies to you and me, doesn't it? And you and I, we read this story, and this isn't just a story about God's people thousands of years ago. It's a story about you and me. And it's a story that says you and I serve a God who may surprise us sometimes. We serve a God that when we think we've got it all figured out, when we've placed everything in the right order, okay, God, put your hand here. Okay, God, bless this. Okay, God, do it this way. God says, nope, I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to do it different. And we have a tendency at times to place our hand on God's hand and move it, don't we? And go, no, God, we've always done this ministry this way. So I'm going to take your hand and put it over here. We've always done it like this, God. Certainly, you wouldn't be calling us to change, would you? And we try to take God's hand and we move it. And God says, no, I'm moving this way. The Spirit of God is moving afresh. And it's new and it's different. And it's not like it used to be. And we have a choice to make. Are we going to grab God's hand and try to force it into our own ministries, into our own way of doing things, into our own lifestyles and say, God, bless what we're doing? Or are we going to say, I'm up for whatever you want, God. oh, I see, you're going to do it a different way now. You're going to move in a different, you're calling us to a different way of living. Okay, God, I'm with you. And as God sends us out, as we are following Him on mission in this world, we might get surprised sometimes. And we might go, wow, I never imagined God was going to do that. Now, you tell me, guys, are we going to be a people who are going to be set in our ways? Or are we going to be a people who we come here each week and we say, God, would you show us where to go this week? Would you show me what conversations to have? Would you bring those people into my life that I need to talk to? And it may require us adjusting at times. And we might be surprised that we planned our day out this way, but God planned it out this way. And we have to be willing to say, I'm following you, God. I'm not driving it here. You are. Oh, okay, God, I didn't realize that I needed to have that conversation today. I didn't realize, God, I needed to invite this family over for dinner tonight. But as I was talking to them, your Spirit just told me, have them over for dinner. And so, God, I'm going to have them over for dinner tonight. I don't even know what I'm going to cook. I haven't even gone to the grocery store yet. But okay, God, I'll do that. And you just go with Him. And maybe your schedule is made out one way, but God calls you to shift it. And you do, because you're responding to the Spirit of God. And here's the deal. Isaiah said it this way, didn't he? For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declared the Lord. That's fundamental, isn't it, for us? To go, what we don't have it figured out. But God, you do. We don't really know what you're calling us to do yet, but we'll follow you wherever that might be. And to open our spirits, and to open our schedules, to open our resources, and be willing to redirect them as His Spirit would lead us. And let me tell you, if we're willing to do that, God will surprise us in tremendous ways. And His surprises will be more than we imagined on our own. I'm not sure how God would be speaking to you this morning, but the challenge, I think, of this text is visual. And I think the crossed arms is one way to think of it. What are we going to do when God does this to us? Are we going to say, or are we going to go, okay, I'm in? How would God be prompting you this morning? As Matt comes and leads us, we want to give you an opportunity to respond. And if you need to come and pray at the altar, you come and do that. If you'd like for me to pray with you, you grab me and I'll pray with you. Otherwise, you come and do that on your own. If there's a decision you'd like to make, maybe there's some of you who've been wanting to join this church, and you're going, how do I do that? You simply come down and you present yourself to this body and say, hey, I'd like to be a member. Maybe God would be prompting you to do that this morning. You come down as we sing.
Let's stand together.